All right, thrill seekers. Let me start out by reading you something from a book I've been reading lately called Explorations into the Eternal by Ramesh S. Balsekar. Ramesh Balsekar was a student of Nisargadatta Maharaj and was sort of a successor to him, although in that tradition I don't think they do successors the way they do in the Zen tradition. But it's pretty clear that Nisargadatta Maharaj had some faith in Ramesh Balsekar's ability to speak about stuff. And here is what Balsekar says about Nisargadatta Maharaj in this book. Nisargadatta Maharaj used to say that among the people who came to see him, a few might have come out of curiosity or in order to accompany someone who wanted to visit him, but most of them were there because they had experienced the horrors of the conditioning of duality, had vaguely glimpsed the nature of the problem, and had been directed to him by some supernatural, in quotes, supernatural force through various incidents which were generally interpreted as coincidences, again in quotes. Everything in the functioning of manifestation is a matter of evolution, and when the intellect arrives at a certain level of understanding, and beyond that finds itself at a sort of dead end, the individual, again in quotes, finds himself directed by a combination of coincidences to the proper master. But, as Maharaj used to point out, before this happens, the problem should have received full consideration from the intellect, and the helplessness of the intellect should have caused a certain intensity of frustration and agony. Idle curiosity aroused by mere reading of books is not enough to produce results. I thought that was quite interesting, and it seems to be somewhat related to what I want to talk about, which is doubt and faith. So this is a bit of continuation from the last two videos, the dreaded Thich Nhat Hanh video and the one about the myth of the Zen master. And one of the things my first Zen teacher used to say was that what was needed to pursue Zen practice was an equal amount of doubt and faith. Now, I wrote an introduction or foreword to this book, Great Doubt, Jeff Shore's translation of Bo Shan's book, Great Doubt. And it's been years since I read this. When did I do the foreword? 2016. Not quite 10 years ago. But, so let's say I did the foreword in 2015. So that was a while. But this is one of the books that talks about the matter of doubt in Buddhism. And one of the things that talks about the matter of faith in Buddhism, the one example I have on my shelves is Philippe Coupe's version, Belly of the Dragon, that talks about faith mind inscription. That's usually the title it's given to it. But this idea of doubt and faith is an interesting one. And the reason I had brought up the Ramesh Balsekar book to begin with is because I've been reading a lot, as everybody who watches this knows, in the Advaita Vedanta tradition. And one of the methods, well, maybe the only method, or maybe the major method that they have in the Advaita Vedanta tradition is to have complete faith in the Guru. Now, my first teacher described this as a deep, deep trap, meaning that this is a system that can go wrong pretty easily. And so when it's expressed by a guy who is running a big ashram, who's taking in a lot of donations, who's doing, stuff and seems to depend on having a following, when you hear that you have to have absolute faith in the Guru, this seems pretty dubious. But when it comes from a guy like Nisargadatta Maharaj, here's the book I've been reading by him lately, who basically, he didn't have an ashram, he didn't have an organization, he taught in one of the rooms of his apartment above a cigarette shop in Bombay. He threw people out a lot. There's several funny scenes in this, well, I don't know how funny they were at the time, where he's kicking people out. He's just telling them to leave during his talks because they're either not getting it or they're bothering him because they're just curiosity seekers, like Ramesh talked about. So when it's coming from somebody like that, it's a bit different. But how about I tell you how it worked for me to have faith and doubt? I would say that I had a kind of total faith in both of my teachers, but not in the sense that I would have drank the poison Kool-Aid or Flavor Aid. Do you know that in Jonestown they were too cheap to get real Kool-Aid and they were using like off-brand Flavor Aid stuff when everybody killed themselves? I mean, that seems so... That's just adding insult to injury to me. It's just terrible that they couldn't even spring for real Kool-Aid when it was their last day on Earth. I mean, what were they saving money for? Anyway, I wouldn't have done that for Tim or for Nishijima Roshi, but I had a deep belief that they were not telling me lies, that what they were saying was true. And because of that, I was willing to do this practice, which made no sense at all and offered no reward. The thing that I read yesterday, where the guy was saying that the whole of Zen is geared towards getting you to give up your good sense in the present for the promise of a reward in the future, wasn't part of my thing. I wasn't looking for a reward in the future, but what I was looking for was a way to understand the real life that I was living now, and there seemed to be something going on here with Tim that I could trust, and with Nishijima Roshi that I could trust. So I was willing to do this practice. The doubt was when Boshan talks about doubt, he's talking about a kind of openness, a kind of a sense of wonder that we don't have this all figured out. Dogen talks about this too. He talks about half understanding, and he talks about the way that when we have a full understanding, it always seems incomplete. And I think that's one of the real difficult parts of this practice, because our normal understanding of faith is that we're going to have total faith and we're going to have a total belief in something. But there's always this kind of feeling like it's not quite there. And that feeling that it's not quite there is exactly what we're going for in the Zen tradition. We're not going for complete, utter belief, but a kind of balance of doubt and faith. Now, there's some people within the Zen tradition who seem to believe that the only way to have this kind of total faith is through an authoritarian sort of system. So you have a very strong leader at the top who you're just supposed to listen to and obey, and you just do the practice kind of blindly. I think this can work. So I'm not going to come out against it totally. But if you're somebody like me, it's just not going to work. That wouldn't work for me. I can't give up my own initiative to that degree to follow a teacher blindly. Also, if you're going to do that, the teacher has to be very, very, very good. And not everybody is good enough to wield that kind of power without succumbing to the urge to abuse it. Now, yesterday, when I was reading that article about the myth of the Roshi, the myth of the Zen master, there was a quote from this book, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, particularly from the intro to the book by Richard Baker, in which Richard Baker himself, this is Richard Baker is the Dharma successor of Shunryu Suzuki, Baker is quoting Trudy Dixon, who's the translator of the editor of this book. And this quote was given by the author of that paper that I read yesterday as an example of Richard Baker trying to establish himself as a Roshi, as a Zen master, and therefore authoritative and perfected and someone you should have trust in by talking about the Roshi in general. And so I went and dug out the book, and I think the full quote is quite interesting. There was a bit that I read, which is about half of the quote, is produced in the paper, but there's more to it. So let me read the whole thing. Here we go. A Roshi is a person who has actualized that perfect freedom which is the potentiality for all human beings. He exists freely in the fullness of his whole being. The flow of his consciousness is not the fixed, repetitive patterns of our usual self-centered consciousness, but rather arises spontaneously and naturally from the actual circumstances of the present. The results of this in terms of the quality of his life are extraordinary. Buoyancy, vigor, straightforwardness, simplicity, humility, serenity, joyousness, uncanny perspicacity, I'm going to have to look that up, and unfathomable compassion. So that's the part that they quoted. Now here's the rest of it. His whole being testifies to what it means to live in the reality of the present. Without anything said or done, just the impact of meeting a personality so developed can be enough to change another's whole way of life. But in the end, it is not the extraordinariness of the teacher which perplexes, intrigues, and deepens the student. It is the teacher's utter ordinariness. This is the part that gets left out in that paper because it doesn't really support the conclusions that, what was his name, Stuart Lax wants us to come to. Because he is just himself, he is a mirror for his students. When we are with him, we feel our own strengths and shortcomings without any sense of praise or criticism from him. In his presence, we see our original face, and the extraordinariness we see is only our own true nature. When we learn to let our own true nature free, the boundaries between master and student disappear in a deep flow of being and joy in the unfolding of Buddha mind. So that entire quote, I think, is important because it gets into the whole deal, the whole schmear. So when I interacted with Tim and with Nishijima Roshi, I was convinced that they had understood something great. But I was near enough to them that I could understand also that these were people like me. And their flaws were... Tim was very forthcoming about his flaws, and I saw them directly, and I'm not going to be a meanie and enumerate what they were, but there was some stuff there, and I could see it, and I could interact with it, and I could see how it worked out in our relationship. Nishijima Roshi, I had this one sort of incident that it's embarrassing to relate, but I'll relate it anyway. He had a few teeth that were bad, and he had some bridge work. I guess some of the teeth that when he smiled were not real teeth. And one of the times I was having some great doubts about him, I happened to go to a lecture, and his bridge was a little bit loose. It wasn't like crazy loose and looked weird, but I could see enough that there was some gaps, and I was like, oh, those teeth are fake, like two or three of them over here. And I thought, oh, this guy didn't even take care of his teeth. How can I trust him as a Zen master? I was getting in one of those moods, and ultimately it was silly. But to see that kind of those kind of flaws and things, and to see that there was still this deep undercurrent of strength below it was really refreshing. The problem of the myth of the Zen master, and quite frankly the myths of some certain famous Zen masters who I won't mention, is that they are kind of presented to us as almost superhuman figures. And people will protest and go, no, I know he's not a superhuman figure. But yeah, all the flaws and all the stuff is hidden away, and it's very carefully guarded by the inner circle who are trying to maintain the image of the flawless master who can be presented on, various television shows and stuff, and everybody can go, whoa. But that is a way to increase faith, but it doesn't help with the doubt part of it. And sometimes that it becomes kind of a backlash because people have a total faith in the image, and when they find out the image isn't true, then there's this backlash of like, oh, he's awful, and I'm gonna, because I was lied to about his perfection and all of this stuff. And I think a balance of doubt and faith is what's needed. So if you ever have a chance to interact with a teacher on a close level, you're going to find all sorts of problems and difficulties. This is why when people write to me and they go, I want to come and study with you, I go, oh, no, you don't. No, you don't. One of the first times, or one of the early times when this happened, I was in Nebraska, and I was giving a talk at this university out there, I think called Hastings University. And after I was done with this talk, these two girls came up who were, in college age girls, because it was a college, and they're going, oh, we want to study with you, and we want to go out to California where you live and study. And I said, no, you don't. You really don't. Because I could see that they, I guess I maybe gave a good talk, or maybe it felt good at the time to them. But what they were seeing was an idealization of me, and that if they did come out and practice with me, they would quickly see that wasn't true, and they would just go away rather fast. I mean, that's what usually happens. People, as soon as they see the flaws in the teacher, they're out of here looking for the perfect one, because they know the perfect one is out there somewhere. So they'll keep going till they find that perfect teacher. A lot of people do that. A lot of people do that with life in general. They're looking for perfection, and there is no, as Pete Ham of Badfinger, the great Badfinger, said, there is no real perfection. So that's, this is another one of those inconclusive videos, I think, where I try to talk about something but don't get to the point. But that's the point. The point is that equal amounts of doubt and faith are necessary, and you have to have a little bit of doubt, a little bit of suspicion, a little bit of skepticism about the teachings and about the teacher, but that is also balanced by this kind of almost irrational total faith. And it's difficult to explain, as you can tell, difficult for me to explain how this all works, but it's the only way that works. It's the only way that's ever worked for me, is to have that balance of doubt and faith. The doubt, the faith that keeps you going, the faith that your teacher isn't lying to you, that there is something to this, even if you can't understand it. For me, when Tim or Nishijima Roshi said something that they said a lot of things that I understood and a lot of things that I could not understand. And I had faith that the stuff that they were saying that I couldn't understand was nonetheless true, because the other things they had told me were true. On the other hand, a kind of a doubt that a kind of skepticism, a kind of openness that I'm not going to just fall for this completely, and trying to balance that rational side with the more irrational side. So there you go, doubt and faith. And if you want to provide me with more faith that you people will provide my living circumstances, well, go to the URL you're seeing on your screen below, which is hardcorezen.info/donate. That is hardcorezen.info/donate. There you will find links to my PayPal and Patreon accounts. Those are my main and usually only ways of making a living, especially right now. It's really number one, or number only. So I really appreciate your support, but as always, this is offered for free, so you don't gotta pay if you don't want to pay. We will see you next time. Have a good time all the time. Bye, Zolls. Hey, Ziggy. How you doing? You feeling better? You're not barfing anymore. That's good. People are worried about you on the internet. But look, he's doing good. He was running around this morning and barking at my father-in-law, so I know he's doing okay. Ziggy, say bye to the folks.